Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be doing the dollar store art challenge. So let's get into it, shall we? For those of you who don't know, the Dollar Store Art Challenge is where you are challenged to make a piece of art using only art supplies that you find at the dollar store. The thing I really like about this challenge is that it really forced me to go out of my comfort zone because I've gotten very comfortable with the art supplies that I have, my Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolor sets, and of course my Copic and Ohuhu Markers. Now, going to the dollar store, my dollar store at least, has pretty slim art supplies pickings. It was actually really hard to find stuff to color with. On the other hand, they have a lot of office supplies there rather than art supplies. So again, the supplies at a dollar store will vary from store to store depending on what they carry. Now, the pencil that I'm using, I got in a pack of like 10 mechanical pencils, and it's pretty decent. I like this pencil. The only thing I didn't really like is something that I don't like in any mechanical pencil, no matter what they are, and that's the fact that they really smudge if you forget to erase it. And later on, I definitely forgot to erase some parts of it. And speaking of the erasers that I'm using, they actually work fairly decently. They do a good job of erasing and they fit right on the back of the pencil. And I got them in a pack of 40, so 40 for $1. That's a pretty good deal right there. One thing that I think was really awesome that I found at the dollar store was this fine liner. Now, it's definitely a bit of a thicker nib than I would usually use, and it came in a set of two, where one had a fine tip, and that's the one that I'm using, and the other one had a chisel tip, which I ended up not using because I for sure definitely preferred the fine tip. But the funny thing is, the fine tip wasn't very fine. It was in fact very thick. So I got a pack of ballpoint pens to use for the smaller bits of shading and hatchwork. Now here I'm using this giant pack of crayons that are just dollar store brand. I believe the brand was called Jot. So a lot of the art supplies that I was using were from this Jot brand. And oh boy, these crayons, I'm pretty heavy-handed when it comes to art supplies, but still I was very disappointed when this crayon broke within like the first minute of me using it. I really had wished that it stood through the test. But I think what really came in useful was these Crayola crayons. these were they felt so much smoother and so much better than those Jot brand crayons that I had been using. Like, they just glided on smoothly and they blended so nicely. So if I had to recommend one thing from the dollar store, it would most likely be the Crayola crayons, because they really perform the best out of all of the supplies. And it's been a real long time since I've actually used crayons, and these surprised me. They were really fun to use, and I might play around with crayons a little bit because it was actually pretty fun. And the Crayola ones worked really well, and they're fairly cheap. Even if you can't find it at your local dollar store, pretty much any art supply store or even grocery store should carry Crayola crayons, and I definitely recommend them. One thing that I was definitely a little bit sad about was that the Crayola crayon pack did not have the very pale skin tone that I was looking for, and the closest shading color that I could find within the Crayola set was their dark brown color. So I had to go in with that dark brown, blend in with it, and go on top with the white crayon to actually make the brown color much lighter and try and blend it out so that it isn't just a harsh brown line. And it worked out fairly well. I do wish I had brought the blending out a little bit more, and that's not on the art supplies fault, that's more on my fault, since I was a little bit unsure on how the blending would work, and I didn't want it to be super harsh cell shading. While the crayons worked fairly well, these markers, what do I have to say about these markers? I do not care for them, but they did their job, and in the end, I do like how it looked. I got this giant pack of, again, the Jot brand markers, and these markers have the smallest tips I have ever seen on a marker. The tips were smaller than the fine liner that I was using. And since these markers were so small, it was really, really hard to cover large areas in the drawing very evenly, so there were a lot of gaps. And with those gaps, I went in with a colored pencil, and I went in with crayons in order to fill in the gaps and make sure that it didn't look super streaky. With the hair, that worked a lot better because the hair has more of a natural rough texture, but with the sweater, you can definitely see the streaking and how the area was definitely filled in with a very small marker. Otherwise, they worked how they're supposed to work. I just really wish that they had a bigger nib, which would have made me actually like them a lot more. I don't think I would recommend these markers though, because after using it just for a little bit, the nib on the lighter orange started to actually rub away on the paper and start bending, and I was actually very worried that that marker was going to break while I was using it. So I made sure to go in actually with crayon instead of marker to do the shading on the hair. I used a purpley violet color for the darker shading, and then I went in with a regular orange crayon to do the rest. And here comes another one of the supplies that really surprised me. These were these correction pens by Jot, and they're basically liquid whiteout but in a pen form. And I really liked how this worked. It made a really nice highlight, and it worked how it was supposed to work. It was definitely a little bit hard to get out of the pen in the way I wanted to, but that happens with basically any white highlighting thing. Like, I have troubles with my white gel pens and my Posca pens, so these worked actually very well. And we can't forget the last art supplies, which is not actually an art supplies, but the Skittles. So overall, I really enjoyed doing the Dollar Store Art Challenge, and for sure, out of all the supplies I used, I would recommend using the Crayola crayons, the mechanical pencils and the eraser, the fine liners and the ballpoint pens, and the Jot liquid whiteout correction pens. And that's all. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!